When you're thinking of how you're going to approach research, there are some really good books. Jane Mayer's written a good book. Barton Gellman's written a good book. What do you look at, and how do you synthesize a story and come up with the key facts that you want to focus on?
Yeah, I mean that was really it. One of the exciting sort of impetus of this movie that it was a little bit like a detective novel or a mystery going after it. And I remembered reading in Dick Cheney's autobiography at one point, for some reason, he described the death of Fred Hampton from the Black Panthers, and he just described it as Fred Hampton was killed because Chicago police suspected he had drugs. And I was like, oh, it's going to be that kind of autobiography. And so we knew we had to go much deeper. And we had the luxury of just amazing journalists, some of them you named, like Jane Mayer, also Ron Suskind, tremendous articles, interviews that were out there. And it was all there. I mean, part of the genius of Dick Cheney is he was using the system to create this power. So a lot of it was there right in front of us, except, of course, the 22 million emails and 500,000 documents he didn't hand over, which I would have loved to have seen. But otherwise, due to, and we actually give it thanks at the end of the credits, due to the work of a lot of great journalists, we were able to find it.
Dede, when you start work on this production, you're covering 5 decades. There are probably, 100 and some odd speaking parts, a couple hundred locations. How do you start to figure out the physical challenges of mounting a production where you might just have like 5 seconds of footage from Cambodia of the bombing there?
Listen, I think you have to start from a place of genuinely feeling the privilege of being able to tell a story, which is what I consider a producer's job. And when you have someone like Adam at the helm and this extraordinary group of people supporting you and expressing what your intention is, you just you just do it. You just figure out how to shoot all of this movie in California, and in a and you just all your job is to just create space for everyone here to be their best selves and to bring their art, and it's a privilege. It's hard, but it's fun too. I like crossword puzzles. It's a bit of like a puzzle.
Speaking of crossword puzzles, I want to ask about editorial, Hank, and about a couple of scenes, the Shakespeare in bed scene, and about how that came together, how you checked it with audiences, and I also have to ask about the dance sequence that's not in this film, and about how that was checked with audiences. And what do you learn as you're cutting and testing a film about what the audience is willing to embrace?
You know, this film was every film you work on has, it seems, has a certain hallmark, and with this film, the hallmark was one of letting go. You know, we had a spectacular dance scene, which is not in the film. We had just a truly beautiful prologue, where, you know, we set young Dick and Lynne up in Wyoming, and that's not in the film. You know, so when the way Adam's always worked, if I can speak for you, because he's so strongly into improv, he tests the film. So we screened the film how many times? 10, 11 times? Many times.
Many times, yeah.
Just to get the temperature. It isn't that we wanted to hear what other people said so much as we wanted to feel how an audience was feeling. You know, and what we found that the audience was feeling was that they found that the dance scene was kind of repellent. They just, you know, it in and of itself, it was beautiful, but as part of the flow, it stopped the film.
Well, we kept joking throughout the process, like Dick Cheney did not want anyone to make a movie about his life. I mean, everything he did was designed.
He really didn't want people to dance it.
And he certainly didn't want that. And so Hank and I in that edit room felt like we felt like we were chasing down a shadow the entire time. And this guy not only didn't leave breadcrumbs, there's no path, there's no forest. There's a Dunkin' Donuts where the forest should be. All right, I went too far with the metaphor. I apologize. But honestly, this guy does not want his story told. He was very smart. He knew that power does not reside necessarily in the spotlight, and he gave us a run for our money. But that was also what was so exciting about it, was every screening, every day we'd have in the edit room, we were chasing this guy down.
And we were learning every time. And when we finally got rid of some of these scenes that we loved, we found that the Shakespeare started to sing. Wow. And it really worked. And it became part of the center of the film.
Steve, I'm going to ask you about Rummy and about how you approached him. We have kind of the public persona that I think a lot of people are familiar with, and then we have the private person we see in the film. What does that give you as an actor in terms of license and what Adam wanted out of the way we see Rumsfeld when he's not on camera?
I'm not at liberty to talk about that. That's part of how I approached it, because I figured this guy was very different in private, and that's kind of where the imagination comes in, because you can't be sure who that person is in private. You get a pretty good glimpse about what he's like in the public eye, but that other side to him is a little bit more of an invention, I think. And the public part, I always thought of him as a very kindly uncle when I would see him in press conferences. He's very sweet and affable. And I think the insidiousness of what lies on the other side is kind of fun. But at the same time, I certainly didn't approach him like he was a villain in any way. And he certainly didn't think he was. I don't think villains think
But if I can just say something.
No.
Legally, Hank, you're not allowed to speak right now. It's a legal thing.
This is how it's been for the past year. There was a lot of pathos in the performance, and
Well, that's my magic.
I thought that was my magic.
It is your magic. No, and I think that's the other side of it too, that these are all human beings. They're not, you can look at them as these figureheads and you can look at them as public personas, but ultimately they have feelings, and certainly this guy had a bit of a downfall, and you kind of imagine where he would be in that moment.
Amy, this is a movie that's very much about a marriage, and it's about a relationship, and it's about how important Lynne is to Dick and what she meant to him and how she really put him on his way. And I'm wondering, when you're thinking about ways to approach Lynne, she's written a lot of books. She's written a memoir, Blue Skies, No Fences. What was important to you about Lynne, and how did you become an advocate for her in the film?
I mean, I didn't really know a lot about Lynne going into it. I didn't know anything personally about her. I knew a little bit about sort of her curated self, the self that she presented. But for me, it was starting with her memoir, going back and hearing, because it's not like Dick's at all. She talks in great detail about things, but she talks about it in a way that feels almost romantic, like sort of, I don't know if anyone's read her memoir. It's very interesting. It's worth a read. But that's sort of where I started to understand her ambition and focus, that she's had it since she was a young girl. This was something that sort of was bred into her from her ancestors and through tough times, So that's kind of where I started, is I really started to recognize that girl. More than the woman that I saw in interviews now. I recognized the girl that I was reading about in the book. So I started with that girl, and I just built upon that.
Christian, there's obviously a physical transformation that takes place for you as an actor. I'm interested in the internal transformation, about understanding the intellect, the psychology, the way that Cheney saw the world. Does that happen in parallel with the physical transformation? Which one comes first? And how did you get to that internal transformation to play Dick Cheney?
I've got no technique at all, and I don't really know what comes first. It all sort of starts happening at the same. Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that in honesty. Definitely, there's certain physical things that you feel that, and then you go, all right, now that's going to help clue into there. But I just wing it with each and every day, and Amy talking about the younger Lynne. I find this movie so poignant and moving, and I get very emotional watching this, and I find it hilarious as well. And I truly think it's one of the most remarkable films I've ever seen in my life. It affects me in a way that I was so surprised at, even having been there when we were making it. But. And part of that is to do with, I very much always imagined Dick in trying to get into his psychology. Before he met Lynne, he really admired Jedediah Smith and John Coulter and Hugh Glass and all of that, and had this very adventurous, streak and this idea of what it meant to be a man. And then the incremental changes, and Hank and what's his name? At the end there.
Andy.
He had something to do with the film. Hank and Adam, I just adore that little short film. I was just trying to hurriedly tell Hank in the wings, where Dick is staring in at the Oval Office. And he's now, and there's obviously still that lust, but there's a sense of arrival and incredible power in the silhouette. And then just the mac and cheese conversation with this young family, but it always brings tears to my eyes, because of just the small adjustments that people make in their lives, and and then you suddenly become this silhouette staring in at the Oval Office, and just so I did my part as we were filming, but I can't tell you how much happened in the edit room there, just how stunned I am with what you guys managed in there, on top of getting to work with Amy and Steve and Sam and everybody else, and what clearly was really special on the days. Hank and Adam just took it to a whole different place there.
Adam, Dede, Hank, Steve, Amy, Christian, thank you so much for coming out.